Well, looks like it is start time here. All right. Well, let us get started here. A couple of housekeeping items as we get started. First of all, hopefully the obvious, that this is the last lecture of the semester. It is going to be what little we can kind of touch here in chapter 34. I'm really going to focus more, as you'll see here in a few minutes, conceptually more than mathematically. So I thought I brought a bunch of toys. So I go, okay, this will be a good wrap-up one. And not to say there won't be any math. I need to do a little bit of math. In part because I want to do as much as would be fair, in the sense that I don't want to overwhelm you on the last day, given that you have a test coming up in 2 days, and given the fact that you have a final coming up in 7 days. In fact, maybe I should ask, when is your final? Tuesday, a week from today. Where? Here. What time? 8 o'clock, right. So it's not the normal start time here. All right, so that sums up the end here. Is we're going to have one lecture today on 34, going to show you more conceptual. Not to say there's not going to be a few math pieces, because there is going to be a few math pieces, enough to give you kind of a simple calculation that you can do on the test in 2 days. And so that's what I'll keep in mind here, that we'll give you one problem. Hopefully it won't be a hard problem. Like I said, I'm more after concept than I actually am the calculations, because the concept here is extremely important, as you'll see. And so that's the last piece of physics for the semester. Then of course Tuesday's a test, Friday's your MC. Don recommended you come in on Monday when you can, and study in the little workroom there. So if you have questions, he can answer those. And then, of course, your test is Tuesday morning. I have not everything recorded, but I've got a lot of stuff recorded. And so there's a bunch of more little packets going around. So find your homework. But at some point, also go back to that email link that I sent you and find your K number and scan across there and see what I do and do not have recorded. Keep your eye on it. Like I said, still got a lot of things to record, particularly some things that are here now. Plus, I know I'm going to have a lot of things to record that you haven't turned in yet, because I know a number of you haven't done the homework for this unit yet, and you usually will come in on Thursday, I'm sure, and will give me those chapters for this unit. And so I'll get that recorded either this weekend or during finals week. So between your test and all of those, keep your eye on it in the next 2.5 to 3 weeks, where I'll hopefully get everything recorded. Well, here's the last bit of stuff that I wanted to talk about. The first one here is transformers, and the second piece is displacement current, which leads naturally into electromagnetic waves. So that's kind of the approach of today. Yes?
Are we going to know how well we did on this midterm before the final? Like, will you have
I certainly hope so.
Okay.
No promises. I'm going to do. So you guys finals on Tuesday. So hopefully I can get Physics 121 done like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I can get 102 done on Saturday, and you guys done Sunday, Monday. That's kind of the goal. That doesn't give you much lead time, but Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday is it. So that's kind of my that's my grading approach. And then also the same thing for the final exam. Then 121 will take the final on Monday, and you guys will take it on Tuesday. So I'll grade theirs and then yours. Okay. All right. Well, as I started to say here, here's what I want you to see about transformers. It really is Faraday's law. They look kind of intimidating when you look at them, but it's a very simple idea. Watch this for a moment. If I were to take an EMF, and this EMF will be an alternating current. And so this is why we just did alternating currents here at the end of chapter 33, and said if I were to put this into just a pure coil, and that's what I'll do here in a second. I have a pure coil. Here it is, 55 turns. And I'm about to feed a alternating current into this. And when I do, I could say, all right, there is an EMF, E1. It must equal to negative of the number of turns in this coil. So I'll call that N1. And when I hook it up in a minute, that's going to be, actually, let me change it, 55 to 110 is probably the best one to do. 110. But in a second, that'll be 110 turns. And that will be equal to the change in magnetic flux that go through that one. All right, what if, at the same time, I take a second coil? And why don't I start with this one? This happens to have 220 turns. So twice as number of here. So 110 here, 220 there. And I will take that, and maybe I'll just change colors, and wrap a green one around the first one. And I'm going to call this EMF number 2. And of course, EMF number 2 would be equal to the number of turns in number 2, the secondary, times the change in flux that goes through the secondary. But here's really the key to this problem. What if I align everything so the flux that is generated in the primary from this alternating current is then equal to the amount of flux that goes into the secondary? That's the key here. Wrap these two things around each other so that we don't have a difference in flux. Now the reality is we won't get exactly the same. We will never get 100% of the flux generated in the primary to go into the secondary. But we can get it relatively close, and we can help it with some magnetic material. So in this picture they show iron. Soft iron works really good at helping direct the fields. So I have then this turn, which is 110, and I will put it on some soft iron. I will then take this one, 220 turns, and put it on some soft iron. And then connect the soft iron together so that hopefully all the flux that is produced in here, N1, primary, goes over to here, secondary. Here's the reason for that. Look what happens. If I set these two equal to each other, then E1 over N1 becomes the same as E2 over N2. Or written another way, how much voltage do I get in the second coil? Do I get the same voltage that went into the primary? Do I get more? Do I get less? It depends on the turn ratio. And so this is the whole idea of the transformers. And this is that last part of chapter 33 that I didn't quite get to. Notice that what it's saying here is how much voltage I have in the secondary depends on the turn ratio between the secondary and the primary. And what the word transformer means then is I can transform the voltage. I can increase the voltage or decrease the voltage. Now, in the setup I have for you, I have a primary here. I am going to send a voltage, an alternating voltage, into here. And I don't know if you can see how this is set up, but this is a transformer I want to show you. But this is a transformer I'm using because this is plugged into the wall. What did we say the voltage on the wall was? Okay, it's 120 RMS. It goes up to 170 and then down to a negative 170. And so this guy right here is a transformer. I'm not going to focus my attention on it other than the fact that when I plug this in and turn this on, we will see that I have a given voltage. And it is not the more dangerous, higher 120 RMS. It has been reduced down in this transformer. So what I'm feeding into this first coil, the primary, is about 7 volts. How much voltage do I get here in the secondary? Is it necessarily the same voltage? Yeah, see, it's not. And the numbers I set up, this is twice the turns as this. This is 220, this is 110. So according to this, if I can feed all the flux in, I should get more voltage out. And so here is just yet another application of Faraday's law by inducing the voltage in the secondary. So here is 14 volts. So 7 volts in, 14 volts out. And so hence the name transformer. I can transform the voltage up or down. I can take this apart. Maybe, there we go. And say, all right, I'm going to, maybe I'll disconnect it here for a second. But let me take this one off and go to this one. This has 440 turns. 4 times more. So, if I am sending in 7 volts here, how much should I get out here? 4 times 28. And so here I have 27.8. So I get a lot more voltage. Or, finally, well, maybe I shouldn't say finally because I want to go down also, but these are referred to as step-up transformers. They are upping the voltage. This happens to be 888 turns. So, again, putting in a relatively small voltage of 7 volts, but 7 times 8 is 56. And I'm getting about a 53.7. So obviously I'm not getting all the flux there, but pretty close to it. And so this is how we use a transformer. This is the idea of a transformer. Yeah.
How much of the energy is lost to resistance versus something else?
Oh, well, there is a lot of energy lost in the fact that, remember, as we send flux through metal pieces, it makes the eddy currents. Okay, and so there is a loss, and this is actually pretty warm. You've probably felt transformers that warm. In fact, as long as I have it in my mind, I might as well pass around. Probably the most common transformer to you is, you know, it's that plug that you have to charge up your phone, to charge up your iPod, your iPad. It is nothing more than a transformer, at least in the first step of it. And so you'll see, and if you imagine a black box around this, and your author's actually done a good job. Actually, I'll just grab this one here. I was going to show you a picture, but this is probably what you're used to seeing. This has the cover on it, but inside of this is this. That's what's going on here. You are plugging it in because this wall plug is a high voltage, and this will step it down to a much lower voltage. Then we have the 4 diodes that are in here, and if you guys remember from the lab, you built those 4 diodes to change an AC into only positive numbers, and we did that full bridge rectifier when we did the oscilloscope. And so you can see that this goes one step further and puts a capacitor across there and changes then an AC ultimately into a DC. So I'll pass that around, but the reason I brought that up is these do get warm. And if you leave it plugged in, even if you're not drawing any current here, you are wasting energy here, often referred to as a vampire energy. It's amazing how much energy in this country we waste because all these transformers are just left plugged in. We walk up. I do the same thing. I grab my phone and I unplug my phone, but I leave the transformer plugged into the wall. So guess what's happening all day right now? Yeah, it's consuming wattage. I'm not sure what it is to answer your question, but they talk about as much as 10% of our electricity at any given time is just heating a bunch of transformers in people's rooms and inside their DVRs and inside their computers, because that current is sitting there waiting for somebody to come along, say in your TV, and hit the remote and then make a connection. And so meanwhile it has to be plugged into the transformer, and meanwhile there is a little bit of electricity drawn because the brains on the TV are still active waiting for somebody to hit the on button. So there is a little bit of activity going on here. So, and people have proposed, and based on your question in the past, I know you're thinking the same, why don't we just always unplug the transformer? And some people have talked about that, but then you'd have to go home and plug everything in before you can actually use it. Yeah.
Did you have the remote operate the relay before the main transformer?
Yeah, but again, you'd have to have a little bit of energy to think about the remote, because the remote and the sensors have to stay active. And then there has to be enough electricity to be active enough to hit the remote. But yes, if there's any room for an improvement in our circuitry, this is probably it. I mean, like I said, I've heard numbers as high as 10%. I know that we haven't done this in a while, but we used to, in this real tough economic times, we would get an email every Christmas break, summer break, and asking us to go through, like in our lab. And Don does a good job of it every time. He turns off all the power strips. So you guys probably noticed that with the computers, turn off the power strips. Now it's kind of a hassle because you got to come in and turn the power strip before you turn on the computer, but it saves 10% of that electricity. And last summer I know we got emails that said, the school saved $150,000 in electricity costs because people went around and turned off their power strips instead of just turning off their computers. So can add up. I don't know the exact number, but there it is. Now I wanted to show you then the other half of this. Let's see, this went up to 4 times. If I disconnect it here and step it down, which is why I saved the 55, this would then be a step down transformer where you're sending all the flux in here, but in this case should get half of the voltage. So 7 becomes about a 3.5. I'm getting a lot of vibrations there, but there is my step down transformer. So again, it all depends on what that turn ratio is, and of course the physics is the Faraday's law. So again, no new physics, but certainly an interesting application. In fact, kind of a fun one to see is, what if the number of turns here was maybe 10,000 times more than that? What would that do? That'd make a lot of voltage, right? Well, I just happen to have such a device. You might recognize it more as the name of a Tesla coil. This is a mini Tesla coil. But inside of here is coil here, and then there is a secondary coil with about 10,000 more turns. So that means that if I take a voltage of about 120 on this tip, then I get 10,000 times that. And this, 10,000. I wonder if I got my number right here. Maybe it's only 1,000 times, because yeah, so that's about 120,000 volts, and that's about what this thing is. So there's your 120,000 volts on the tip, and it looks a lot like that Vandy graph, a little more powerful, because that one hurts. With that one, you can't really feel it, but it's got quite a bit of voltage and makes a good spark. And it's really no different than what goes on inside of your car. What is the voltage on that battery that is under the hood? 12 volts. But you see, to get a big spark like this, to burn the gasoline, I need tens of thousands of volts. So how do I turn 12,000 volts into tens of thousands of volts. And we're still, how do I turn 12 volts DC into 10,000s of volts? See, did you catch that? I mean, this was fairly easy to demonstrate and to show, because what did I start with? I started with an alternating current already. And an alternating current means that there would be a change in flux. It's the change in flux in the secondary that induces the EMF. What if this was hooked to a DC source? What would be different here? Yeah, it would be kind of boring, except for maybe when I first plugged it in. Because if this was DC, once I plugged it in, then there would be a change, and then there would be an EMF, only while I'm plugging it in. But a moment later, with a constant current going through the primary, how much voltage do you get in the secondary? Yeah, none, right? You don't have any changes. So, here's a little clever trick. It's the same as that bell. You remember that school bell we had in here? We did something like this. We said, all right, let's take a simple DC voltage here. Let's run it through in what I will call points here. And maybe a little resistor just to get the right amount of current. But it's this little metal contact here that as the current flows through, this current can flow down through this electromagnet. And so hopefully you're seeing here, when I hook this all up, the current flows. As the current flows through this solenoid, this electromagnet, it becomes a magnet. What does it do to this little metal piece right here? Pulls it down, pulls it away, opens a contact, if you will. Looks maybe something more like this. And what does that do to the current? Then it stops it. So if the current stops, then what happens? Well, that's no longer a magnet. If that's no longer a magnet, it makes contact again, turns on the current. And so essentially we have changed a DC into an AC. It's really more of an on-off, on-off. But every time it goes on and off, then if we hooked this to a lot of turns, then we would get an EMF in our secondary. So we can do it with a DC source. And so here is my little one. Unfortunately, the large number of turns are kind of buried in the large box. The points on the side here, you can see that they can make contact. And so as I put this together with a 6-volt battery, I don't know, can you see a little spark when it kind of opens and closes? Just inside the box is the magnet, and so as it opens and closes, it turns the currents on and off and makes a little spark. Now if they get too far apart, it won't spark. If they get too close, you get more current and less room for a spark, so less ability to ignite your fuel. And I love this thing. It's literally out of an old Model T. This is the old Model T. Wood. It's not plastic box. This is wood. And so one of our older faculty who has since retired had brought that in out of his grandpa's old Model T here. So there's our inductance there. Now, please remember, you don't get anything for free here. If we increase the voltage, what else happens? Yeah, and so if you said that you are sending in a certain amount of current in the primary and a certain amount of voltage into the primary, that's how much power is really going into your transformer. Okay? You could lose some energy, but you certainly couldn't make any energy along the way. Too bad. But if you were perfect at 100%, Then you could say on this end is my secondary. And so the current in the secondary times the EMF in the secondary would match. And so current in the primary times voltage in the primary has to equal current in the secondary times the EMF in the secondary. So you can begin to see that if you stepped up the voltage and we went from, say, 120 volts, or I guess in this case it's Model T, I go from 6 volts to, I'm not sure how many volts it is now, let me just say 20,000. But if we go from 6 to 20,000 as we step up, then that means the current must go down. And so the current in the primary, if I were to take an ammeter and measure the current on this end, it'll be a fairly large number. If I measure the current jumping this gap, it is extremely small, which is why I didn't really mind putting the Tesla coil on my hand, knowing that even though the voltage is pretty high, the current is pretty small, the overall power is pretty small, and I'm not going to electrocute myself.
So when you get shocked, like what hurts you? Like more current, more voltage, or a combination?
A combination. You can have a lot of voltage. As I said, this was probably 100,000 volts. But it wasn't much current or much charge, and hence not much energy. And so it's, you know, it's that current that really, and there's different ways of injuring yourself by getting electrocuted. Interesting enough that, and maybe I should answer it by, if it's just a burn on your hand, then it's the overall power, so it's voltage and current. If it's the more dangerous type where your heart stops, or your brain freezes up, that's the current that actually flows through the inner part of your body, because particularly my heart, is a muscle, and it contracts based on an electrical signal it's getting from my brain. And so if I put another electrical signal through it, that's where you run into troubles. In fact, it wasn't this class, but it was my 102 class. So we were doing this, actually. This one here. And maybe some of you remember it, but this is our power supply. I turn it on, and in a minute we'll put some light bulbs in there. But it's about 10,000 volts. And I told the students, be careful, don't touch it. It won't feel comfortable. And I should have overemphasized it. I guess I gotten lazy over the years. I used to really emphasize it, and nobody shocked themselves in years. Well, guess what happened? Yeah. So one of the students, she forgot to turn it off, and she reaches in and grabs this electrode right here, and it shocked her good. And anyways, but she really felt her forearm cramp up. She goes, it's cramped up. Anyways, but that's the answer to your question, is your brain does that. And so when you get these, too much current, this one doesn't do it, that Van de Graaff doesn't do it, but that light bulb one will do it. It'll make your muscles cramp up. And it's obviously, if it's your heart that cramps up, then it's not pumping. That's, and even when you fortunately, when the electricity is turned off, things go back to normal, but not always, and that's how people end up dying. That's what I'll call the low power danger. The other one is it could just be so much power it burns you, fries you, and damages tissues because of that. So, anyways, I don't know how we got on that there, but so that's another option.
Sorry, just one more thing on that topic. So how could someone survive a lightning bolt?
Well, again, the lightning bolt usually doesn't really go through their body, and it's also momentarily. So their body cramps up, their heart stops, everything kind of freezes, locks up, the brain doesn't function for that moment in time, but then it's all gone. And so, assuming it starts right up, or if medical care is nearby, they can pound their chest or, do the little shock therapy that they do, which is, again, that shock therapy. That is that same thing. You're electrocuting somebody's heart who stopped, and you say, okay, your heart stopped. Let's get it started. And you give them an electrical shock, and it cramps up, and then hopefully the moment after that, it keeps that rhythm. So your body's designed to keep that rhythm, and when you get it out of the rhythm, then weird things happen, and they don't tend to get back into that rhythm.
So is that why, like, when we were working like on F-18s and stuff like that, we get a certain amount of shock, like, from a certain amount of voltage, like, we'd have to go to the hospital to get checked out, because they would have us on an EKG to check our heart rate.
Right, and now your heart, and then when those pulses can do some weird things, like instead of the whole heart cramping up, it can get a shock where part of the muscle, and so your heart's doing kind of a soft pump, and it's not really doing a full pump, and those aren't always noticeable. So as you said, you need they'll take you to the medical room and say, okay, how is that heart really doing? Did it come back and functioning right, or is it, out of rhythm, and not functioning right? Maybe you've seen these. My wife has one, although she tried it once and said she'll never wear it again. But you ever seen those weight loss belts? and you strap it on, and essentially it's shocking you, and it puts a little electrical pulse, and the idea is to make your stomach muscle cramp up. And so, the first time she goes, "Oh, this will be cool." She straps it on. Ooh. 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 And she had it on for about 20 minutes and took it off, and next day her stomach was sore, and she goes, "I don't think this is healthy. I'm not doing this again." So she threw it out. But that, I guess it is essentially the same thing as you doing sit-ups, I guess, right? You're tightening up, but in that case you're involuntarily tightening up. It's just sending its own little pulse and making it tighten up. So 20 minutes of that, you're going to be sore. Anyways, and maybe that was a little longer than I wanted to put here at the beginning, but I did want you to see that, because let's now get into this last chapter, chapter 34. Oh, going back to your comment about being electrocuted, I thought you were going to say one of the dangerous things about being electrocuted, like say you're vacuuming and something goes wrong and the wire comes loose, and you touch the wire, or the wire touches the vacuum cleaner and you're touching the vacuum cleaner, is this, that if this is the pole or something that's electrified and you touch it and then you cramp up, what happens?
You won't let go.
Yeah, you can't let go. You can't let go. Nobody else can get you to let go. And really kind of a dangerous situation. And unfortunately, there ends up being two people electrocuted, because then the second person comes up and says, "Here, I'll get you off." And so you end up with these things like a double electrocution, just like double drownings. It's terrible. And what was the one? Maybe, hopefully you guys were studying so much you didn't catch this on the news, but now I can't remember what state it was. Yeah, it was a couple of days ago.
It was one in Humboldt.
Where was it Humboldt?
There was like a dog.
Yeah, the dog went in, so then the 17-year-old boy went in.
It was really sad.
So then the dad went in to say the 17-year-old boy.
17-year-old boy couldn't swim.
And, well, it was heavy surf.
It was like 10-foot surf.
It was like 10-foot surf and a steep beach. So the boy couldn't handle it, so then the dad went in, and didn't the mom go in?
Yeah.
And then the mom went in, and all they found at the end was the dog. The dog got out.
The dog lived, and the parents washed up on the beach.
Parents washed up, and they were still looking for the kid's body, last I read. So, I don't know how to get on drowning. But these double drownings, in that case triple drownings, and these double electrocutions and triple electrocutions are just, that's why the best idea is shut the power off, then help the person who's electrocuted. Yeah. Huh? Oh, yeah, and then that's kind of the other one is, you usually have rubber-soled shoes on, so a good drop kick is, boom, will at least break you away. Even if you do get a little shock, you'll hit them and fall, and hopefully you hit them far enough that they break free and maybe leave a good bruise so they'll remember it, but not do that again. Yeah.
Is it kind of like that? That you try to get this continuous cramp on, it's not more of an issue for direct, like DCF or those things like that?
No.
Like you get one little shock and then you kind of relieve.
I don't think so. I mean, because you're constantly getting shocked 60 times a second. So there's not enough delay for you to let go. I mean, your muscles will cramp. I mean, I shocked myself pretty good with the HC. I don't remember it evening up. It was bad. It was just like, oh. Well, which is, again, why, if you watch electricians carefully, as they are working, they're like, you know, hey, did you shut off the panel? Yeah, I did. Okay, yeah, right, sure you did. You know, so the first thing you do is you kind of grab it like back of your hand thing. And it's the idea that, okay, what happens now if I get shocked? Right, I cramp up and I pull away from it. And go, oh no, that's live. You know, just made my hand cramp up. You got the wrong circuit breaker. You know, type thing. Yeah.
On the 60 hertz is like being shocked a lot. You're working with different types of equipment. But the one that probably like took the worst was that 400 hertz, 210 volts, 400 hertz.
I'm not so what little I know, I'm not so sure it's because of the higher frequency. It's just the power that you got based on that. Well, yeah, okay, so there's 3-phase right there. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of power there. Of course, how much actually goes to your body is a function of not just the size of the power supply, but also then how much resistance, you know. And so if you had been working hard and your body was sweaty with the salt, usually can get easily electrocuted compared to when you weren't hot and sweaty and your body's dry. The resistance can change dramatically. I mean, I watched the Edison guy. I had a power line go down, the one that, you know, that connects from the transformer on down to my house, and the winds came and a tree knocked it loose. And so I had called Edison, and he came and he looked at it, and he goes, oh yeah, we need to put a new line in here, but I'd hate to shut off the power to all your neighbors. And he goes, I've been working hard though, I'm pretty sweaty. And then he just put on a pair of leather gloves. And he goes, amazing how much resistance is in these leather gloves. And he just grabbed the raw wire and got up there and hooked it up and connected it. And all right, I'm good. So, I guess that's what, so he knew what he was doing. I guess he was trained for knowing how much resistance he could get with his leather gloves. And so he goes, yeah, that's better than shutting off your neighbor's power. So, and I got my power back on, so I was happy. Well, anyways, going into chapter 34 here, like I said, I want to show you a couple things here from chapter 34. I'll start off by this and ask you this question as kind of a summary as we get to the end here. Electric fields then are produced by two conditions. What were those two? What's the very first thing we did in chapter 23? Yeah, just charges. I mean, hopefully it's so obvious it's kind of hard to answer that one. Well, charges, right? Charges make electric field. Good. But then recently, what was the second way we learned? Yeah, so a changing magnetic flux. Or I'll just put it as a changing magnetic field. And so, as I mentioned back then, is before this semester is over, and this is it, is that I want you to realize there are two ways to make an electric field. One is charges, and one is a changing magnetic field. How about a follow-up to that? How would you create magnetic fields? How have you learned so far? Okay, so the first way we've learned, and that's what I want to get at. There is also two ways. The first way was what we called Ampere's law, right? We called this a current. Maybe for now, I'll call this a conduction current. the charges are actually then flowing through your wire. Anybody want to make a guess on what chapter 34 is all about? Yeah, what is the second way of making a magnetic field? Is, a changing, electric field. And so, if I can summarize then this end of the chapter here, or this end of the semester really, is two ways to create a magnetic field, two ways to create an electric field. And this is the last step in the puzzle. This is the part you haven't seen quite yet. In fact, it was Maxwell that kind of started it. So let's look at this picture. Here is Maxwell's approach as we get to this last chapter here, chapter 34. And like I said, we'll probably just have enough time to really do it conceptually, but look at this picture. He says, all right, if you, and I'll just clear this one off, and take something with a capacitor. So that picture up on the screen is supposed to be a zoomed in of a whole circuit with a capacitor in there. So I'll put C for my capacitor. There might be a resistor here too, a power supply perhaps, a switch also. But if that's your circuitry, you might remember Ampere's law. What did Ampere's law say? Yeah. Ampere's law was this first condition. How do we get a magnetic field? Well, we get a magnetic field if charges are moving. And what it simply said was that if you took a loop, and so we will make a closed loop, we will integrate that loop of the magnetic field. That has to equal to the current that goes inside of it. And so if I were to take a loop and draw a little flat ring around it, which is supposed to be represented with this surface S1, this little blue area. If I do a path around here, as you know, we would get a magnetic field, right? In fact, let me not go through the math again, but you might remember that the magnetic field then comes out to be that. And so we learned that yes, there is a magnetic field because yes, there is current flowing. But here's where Maxwell's genius comes in. He says, wait, could this equation possibly be complete? Because what it is saying here is if you draw a surface, any surface, and you do an integral along the path that outlines that surface, you will get a magnetic field based upon how much current goes through there. And that's what that blue surface is. But Maxwell came along and said, let's look closely at surface number 2. Surface number 2 is not flat. Surface number 2 is bowed around, and so that the surface itself goes through the capacitor. Now, it still has the same outlining parameter. And so Maxwell looked at this and said, there's got to be something more to this. Why? Because if you look at that brown surface, surface number 2, you still get the same thing on this side of the equation. You still get B times 2 pi r. But how much current actually goes through your brown surface? None. So there's the question. Does it equal none? Or does it equal mu naught I? You couldn't get a different magnetic field just because you have thought about a different surface. Now, of course, probably you're thinking the same thing that Maxwell first thought. Well, maybe it only works for flat surfaces. It wouldn't work for a bowed surface. But as he looked carefully at the math, he says, no, it really should be true for any surface. And so it gave him some insight. Some insight that I want you to see is maybe there is a second way of creating a magnetic field. Maybe this equation is not complete. Maybe there's a second term. Just like there are two ways to make a magnetic field, electric field, shouldn't there probably be two ways of making a magnetic field? And so as he looks carefully at it, and what I want you to see, if you look carefully at it, look at what you have different in the brown surface compared to the blue surface. What goes through the brown surface? An electric field. And more than that, it's a changing electric field if there is current in there. Doesn't that fit with the blue surface? In other words, the blue surface says you will get a magnetic field if there is current. The brown surface is saying you will still get a magnetic field if there is a current. But in this case, the field is created by a changing electric field. In fact, the next picture is kind of nice because he just kind of switches roles between the brown surface and the blue surface. He says, well, let's look at it this way. And I don't know why the picture is tilted, but he said if you were to just do surface 2, which is a plane like this, you would get a circle around it. And Maxwell argued that I bet then there is a missing piece here. There should be a second way of creating a magnetic field. It's very clear looking at a flat surface versus a bowed surface. The bowed surface gives us, in this case, surface 1, that brown bowed surface would tell us that the magnetic field is coming from the actual current that is moving. But the flat surface, surface number 2, is telling us we're getting a magnetic field from the change in the electric field. And so Maxwell's argument here is you should get the same field. So Maxwell wrote it as a second term, and he called this a displacement current, which is not a very common word, but what he really means by displacement is a missing current. There is some kind of something. There is a missing current that is giving us the field. And so he makes the following step. He says, well, let's look at this math. This math would say the following, that the displacement current should come out to be the same as the current. You can hopefully see that again in that diagram, because again, if you look at surface 1, you should get this term, and that should be 0. No current goes through there. But if you look at surface 2, that should give you this term without that term. Either one should give you the same magnetic field. So his argument was, we're missing something here. We are missing the second way of creating a magnetic field. So again, let me emphasize. 2 ways to create an electric field and 2 ways to create a magnetic field. The first one is just regular moving charges, but the second one is changing electric field. And I think it's too bad he called it displacement current, because I think when you call it current, students think there's got to be charges moving around, and I want to emphasize, that's not what is making the magnetic field. What is making the magnetic field is the fact that the electric field is changing. And so he does a couple of steps here. He says, well, the current would be dq dt. The current, or the charge, in the capacitor would be the capacitance times the voltage. The capacitance has to do with geometry, so that's not going to change. If it is a parallel plate capacitor, it would be epsilon naught times the area times the distance between them. The voltage would be the electric field times the distance, again, if it is a parallel plate capacitor. And the reason that helps is the D's cancel off. And finally, we get what he discovers here is the displacement current is really epsilon naught times the derivative of E times A. What would you call E times A? And this is electric flux. And so, to finish the semester and to finish everything we know about electricity and magnetism, we have what we now call Maxwell's and Ampere's equation. It has the first term, which we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 weeks here, but it has an added term of mu naught epsilon naught times the change in electric flux. And so, let me emphasize, we learned this much a while ago. This much is Ampere's law. This much is saying you can create a magnetic field from current. But now, I'm saying today, how else can you make a magnetic field? From changing electric field or changing electric flux. And so what you'll see next is some amazing consequences of that. And without that last little step, a lot of the things that we enjoy today, like our cell phones, would not exist, as you will quickly see here. It is this added term that is real important here in the rest of these little toys I have up here to show you. That the second way of creating a magnetic field is from a changing electric field. And hence, that's why we call this then the Ampere-Maxwell equation, telling us how do you get a magnetic field? 2 ways. Yeah.
The change in electric field the change in electric field is because it's AC, right?
Oh, I'd say it the other way around. If it is AC, then I would have changing electric fields, which then make magnetic fields. If it was DC, I guess I would have changes only when I am hooking things up and disconnecting them. Because again, I do have a change momentarily in a DC circuit until that charge of the capacitor comes into play. Okay? And so there, as I said, is the displacement current and Maxwell's displacement current. Now let me talk conceptually about this for a while here, because here's what this means. All right, what if I have an alternating circuit? And let me just hook one up here. I have over here somewhere, right here, a long wire and a function generator. Now you've seen this function generator many, many times. All it does is make an AC current, an AC signal. So I'm going to take this and plug one end of a very long wire, and maybe I will, for the sake of symmetry here, maybe I will move the signal generator over here to this edge. And I'm going to just take this long wire and hook it to the other side, something like this. And I'm just going to kind of spread it out. I guess we're done here with this. And I'm just going to kind of wrap it, make this loop maybe as big as possible. Get these wires out of the way here. And I want to stop and think about what I've just created here. Let's see. I've got my signal generator on. Now it's set for a pretty high frequency. I don't know if you can see from there, but that says 1,254 kilohertz. So this is really 1.2 million hertz. Okay? So to simply put, I've got current going around here, back and forth, 1.2 million times every second. Fair enough? But that means the current is changing. Now, what does current create? A magnetic field. But because the current is changing, wouldn't the magnetic field be changing? And what does a changing magnetic field create? An electric field. Now, what then does that electric field create? Another magnetic field? And then what does that magnetic field create? Another electric field? Here's the concept I want you to get here. I have, as simple as it is, I have a transmitter. I have current flowing in this loop. When the current flows in that loop, because the current is changing, the magnetic field changes. Because the magnetic field changes, it creates an electric field. That electric field creates then a magnetic field. And so if I were to stand, say, here, and if I could see this with my eyes, I would see a very large magnetic field created from this loop. But that would create an electric field. And that electric field would create a magnetic field. And that magnetic field would create an electric field. And what would happen 100 miles from here? There would be an electric magnetic field hundreds of miles away, maybe weak by that time, but all because of what I'm doing right here. Now, I don't have much current, so I'm not going to go hundreds of miles away. But to demonstrate that there is a field, I'm going to just grab a radio. The reason I got it set at about 1.2 million is because if I set this on AM and maybe find someplace where there's no radio station, maybe right about there. Looks like my dial's pointing to about 1.4, 1.5 megahertz. But this radio is set up then to detect any magnetic field at that frequency. So, let's see what happens if I turn the dial right about there. It is picking up. Maybe I'll put it over here somewhere. But I just want to emphasize the wirelessness about it, right? This is your communications. I convince you that it is coming from me, right? It is coming from this device. And so as I plug it in, it creates a current, creates a magnetic field, which creates an electric field, which creates a magnetic field, which creates an electric field, which creates a magnetic field. And that's what this thing is picking up. Now, granted, it's garbage, so there's nothing real exciting about that. I can modulate it a little bit. Maybe I can add to it by giving it an organized pattern. Make sure I get the order right here. Maybe I'll turn on a little power supply here and see. Hello? And if I'm lucky, I should get about the same frequency. Can you hear me in there? No?
It was working a second ago.
That's right there, right there, right there, right there, right there, right there. No. Testing, 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 testing. Am I close, 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 close? Yeah. And it's not much quality, obviously. And a lot of work needs to be done. Is it going through? Okay. So obviously a lot of work needs to be done here. But nonetheless, it hopefully illustrates your telecommunications, your wireless communications. And so one creates another, which creates another, which creates another, which creates another. Your author's done a good job here in this chapter by giving you a picture of it. And I will jump to that picture. I decided to not take the time to go through the derivation, but your author does it this way. He says, look, if you do something like this, if you set up a grid, if there is a magnetic field created in the z direction, and so that's essentially what I am doing here. I am creating a magnetic field in the z direction. And then that will create a field perpendicular to that. Isn't that what that says? That says that the magnetic field around the loop and the electric field through it, and maybe I, for completeness, should add the second equation, because here's where we're going to run out of time for, we'll do red and green. That'll be very Christmassy. But this is the second equation. Here is Faraday's law. And Faraday's law says that if you have a magnetic flux, that creates an electric field. And that's what this picture is trying to illustrate. This picture is trying to say, if I have a magnetic field coming in the z direction, that should then create an electric field in the y direction. And so here is the electric field, here is the loop, and there is the flux. If we continue on, the magnetic field then creates an electric field. Then what happens a moment later is the electric field then creates a magnetic field, which then the magnetic field creates another electric. The electric creates another this electric creates another magnetic. This magnetic here creates, and you get the idea of one field creates another. They are perpendicular to each other. And again, unfortunately, due to time, I'm going to jump right to the grand finale. This is what the author wants you to see. That these two interacting terms, okay? The fact that a magnetic field can be created from a changing electric field, and the other way around, that which one did I say? So changing electric can make a magnetic, and a changing magnetic can make an electric. What we can do is start here, and hundreds of miles away, we would have an electric and a magnetic field over here that is then being picked up by this instrument. Now, I happen to know from past experience that this instrument likes to pick up, and I'll turn this one off. I guess it is off. This one likes to pick up magnetic fields. There is, when I take this apart, a loop in here. And so this loop will get magnetic flux through it. And that changing flux is what induces a current in here. Watch, listen carefully. What if I find a radio station?
This California man is pleaded guilty in New Jersey to several charges stemming from threats he made against his ex-wife.
What if I take this radio and turn it?
You'll get all the news first here at AM 1290, your News Press radio station.
Did it? No, I think they just stopped.
Shouldn't have said that.
Bummer. Let's try another.
With the Corporation for National Service and utilizing their AmeriCorps program.
FEMA Director Craig Fugate on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers looking for standing.
Can you tell it's kind of weak there?
Some of the cost to the NYPD.
And kind of strong there?
President George H.W. Bush remains at a Houston hospital where he's been treated.
Because what is going on to pick up the information? Yeah, I need flux. I need Faraday's law. So between Faraday's law and Maxwell's displacement current, there's some transmitter out there somewhere that is sending current through here, on, off, And as it sends it on, off, the electric field makes a magnetic field, the magnetic field makes an electric field, so forth and so on. And so hundreds of miles away, and that's where I may be now, hundreds or maybe even less than 100, I don't know where this one was coming from, but what I do know is when it gets here then, there would be magnetic flux that goes through a coil in here. And as the flux goes through, it would induce a current, and it's that current that I am picking up. And the induced current would be based on the magnetic field. And the magnetic field is based upon the current that was way back here in the transmitter. And so there is what we call electromagnetic waves. And that's really the big piece. So these two together, this term coupled with that term, lead us to the final stage of the semester, and the final part of this chapter is what we call electromagnetic waves. And maybe I'll just put that on the board and spend a good deal of time talking then about the structure of these electromagnetic waves. I'll start with the name. Any guesses why we might want to call them electromagnetic? Again, this is the picture I want you to leave with in your head here is, what are these made out of? Electric and magnetic fields. They feed on each other due to Faraday's law and Maxwell's displacement current. And so, if you were to look carefully at this at a moment in time, you would have an electric field one way and a magnetic field the other way. And then that would lead to another. So if you could see these with your eyes, it would be very helpful, because I would have then a magnetic field this way, and in this picture an electric field this way. And then a moment later, over here, guess what happens? Well, this magnetic field creates then an electric field. And this electric field then creates a magnetic field. And so as you can see, although it would be nice if this was kind of a motion picture, these are supposed to be traveling. That field right here goes from here to here, to here, to here, to here, to here, to here. And so hence we call them waves, hence we call them electromagnetic wave, because the part that is traveling is the electric and the magnetic, and that carries with it energy. Remember we said that the electric field has energy and the magnetic field has energy? And so this is our wave. And so this information gets propagated. Now, your author does a good job of saying that these waves are made of an electric field and a magnetic field. And since one creates the other, shouldn't they mathematically be connected to each other? I mean, the size of the electric field and the size of the magnetic field should be coupled together, right? So, what is that number? I'm going to hold off on that. They should be traveling with a certain speed. Fair enough? And again, I'm going to run out of time here, so I think your author does a good job, but as I looked at it this morning, I thought it would be better to kind of show you the applications of this and get you more of the conceptual than to go through the individual math pieces. But your author takes a section and he goes through this and he says they should be traveling at some speed. And I'll give you the answer here in a minute. But I want you to see a couple things before you see both of those ratios. For example, I set this at, what was this one at? 1 point something, 1.3 megahertz. Couldn't have I had a different frequency? Couldn't have I, say, turned it down to, a half a megahertz? Would that still be making electromagnetic waves? Yes. And so, even though I had it here on the radio dial, and as I look closely on the radio dial, it looks like it can read anything from about 0.5 megahertz up to about 1.6 megahertz. So I'm still within the range, barely, that this radio can pick up. But if I went even lower frequency than that, do I still have electromagnetic wave? Yeah, and so I have a whole continuum of electromagnetic waves. There's a lot of different electromagnetic waves that I can create. And so that's what some of this other equipment is here for. Now, this little piece of instrument does it internally and just made the frequency. What if I built something like this? And this is actually, well, the inside of this is this. This is inside of this. This is inside of this. What does this do? And I'll pass it around so that you can see, but what I want you to see is there are spokes in here. And if I were to draw a picture up here, it looks something like this. And it continues all the way around the circle. But let me just draw one set of it. What if I put a bunch of negative charges here? And I got those negative charges from over here. So this end is positive, that end is negative. What would happen? Wouldn't these negatives try to race over to here? Do you see this single loop? What's that single loop? Isn't that an inductor? See how they're near each other? Isn't that a capacitor? What happens when we have an inductor and a capacitor and we start with our capacitor charge? What did we learn? I guess that was 2 chapters ago. Wouldn't this oscillate? Wouldn't this current go around over to here and change the electrical energy into a magnetic energy from the inductor? And then once it goes through the inductor, wouldn't the inductor charge the capacitor again? And so if we were making a plot of the charge on the capacitor as a function of time, we would start with a positive charge, then it would go negative, then it would go positive, then it would go negative, then it would go positive, then it would go negative. And if there was no resistance, wouldn't this keep going forever and ever? Isn't that what we learned about a capacitor and inductor? And what is the frequency? Wasn't this the square root of L over C? And what I want you to see in here is I have a mini oscillator. I have an inductor and a capacitor. I'll send it around if you want to take a closer look with it. But this thing is going to oscillate. And it just so happens that that size and those inductance and that capacitance makes it oscillate at 2.45 gigahertz. Well, why do I care about that? Because I claim then if I turn this on, and there's nothing in there yet, so I won't leave it on for too long. Hey, what happened to the light bulb? Oh, Don took it out for, shoot, good reasons, but well, okay. The point is, this magneton is making the frequency. And it's making it real large. So, what are microwaves? Electromagnetic waves. They're just in the range that are not part of the radio dial. They are at a range of a much higher frequency. They're up in the gigahertz. But maybe to convince you, maybe you remember this little experiment. Was a while ago. But what happens when I get, where'd it go? Here we go. Maybe we better have some lights off here. That's not very dark. But if I make a little spark here, well, maybe I'll just make a direct spark here. Uh-oh. There it goes. Can you see some light? Very little light? Should I turn this off? How come I get a light there? Yeah, I'm creating an electric field. If I hit it directly with the spark, it doesn't want to work today. Ah, there it goes. Ouch, that one hurt. So that one, okay. But if I hit it directly with that, that's going to make an electric field. And an electric field should make the spark go on. What I want to convince you on is that this spark, right here, as it jumps across there, isn't that a current? And when we have current, what does current create? A magnetic field, right? Now, I have no control over that current. And in fact, if you could look closely at that current, it would probably hit and ricochet, and some would do it really fast, so that would be a high frequency. Some would do it slow, so that would be a low frequency. But the point is, when you make a little spark here, that is making a current of all kinds of frequencies. Current makes a magnetic field. What does a magnetic field make? An electric field. What does an electric field make? A magnetic field. And this continues on. So right here, I am making electromagnetic waves. How could I detect them? Right there, with the flash of the light. If I were to turn this radio back on, and hopefully there's no radio station. Can you? It should swamp the machine every time the spark happens and say, look, there's a little bit of an electromagnetic wave that's created here. Not much, but every time I get some movement, I get an electromagnetic wave. But I really wanted you to see that the light bulb goes on when it gets hit with this electric field, because what would happen if I put the fluorescent tube in the microwave, I should get, and this is my evidence of these microwaves, are electromagnetic waves. And they burn out real easy, so I don't want to do it too long here. But there is my evidence to you, anyways, that this is an electromagnetic wave. It is this electric field, like that one, that makes it go off. How come you're not supposed to put metal in the microwave? Because it does what? It sparks. Why does it spark? Because these microwaves are okay. There we go. That wasn't much of a spark. The glass plate separating the spark a little much. No? Oh, there we go. Much better. Oh, okay. And I don't want to do it too long, otherwise I won't have the microwave anymore to show you in the next class here. But there is the whole idea, if you will, of my evidence for you that these are electric fields. And simply that magneton creates a very strong electromagnetic wave, which is another one, another one, another one. And so I think you're getting the idea that we could use these waves to transmit energy, as we do in this case to warm up our food, or to transmit communications, as we often do, whether they be in the microwave region where you're getting your satellite signal from your direct TV or your dish network, or just your cell phone, or maybe your Wi-Fi at home. I mean, all of these use these electromagnetic waves to communicate one to another. Yeah.
Why does it damage the microwave?
Well, you're short-circuiting it, and so you're running current in parts of the microwave that weren't designed. Now, hopefully it's just the frame of it, so chances are you won't damage it too much. But you could. You also end up putting metal, you reflect the microwaves back into the magneton, and so now you're heating the magneton, and you can overheat it and burn it out. And that's why running a microwave without anything in it can damage a microwave, because all the microwaves do is bounce around. They're looking for somewhere to absorb, and they end up going back into the magneton, get reabsorbed there. The magneton gets hot, overheats, burns out. So you always want to make sure you have something in there, like a glass of water.
What if you had a glass of water and a fork?
Well, again, you're still getting a direct reflection off the fork, but personally, I've never had troubles with a fork. I've done the fork many times. Foil's great too, because foil's got little pointy edges. Notice I use the pointy edge, right? Because what did we learn earlier about the pointy edges? That's where the charges build up, right? And the charges build up, that's where I'm going to get the best spark. So I'll get the spark. And in this case, I was trying to get it down low so that the spark would go down to the metal plate. Yeah, see, look at that, just blackened it real good. And so it just went right through and took off the paint. Yeah, so there's a little black mark on there. Did I see another question?
You answered it.
Oh, okay. So there is this whole idea of the electromagnetic wave. I'll keep going. Of course, this one is used for heating. This one is used more for communications here. And so if I plug this one in, this happens to be at a much different, I don't have any available plugs. This happens to be at a much different frequency than my microwave oven, and it tends to be at a lot less power. But I don't know if you saw this meter move. I'll turn this away. But this right here has a small little metal loop, okay? And when I plug it in, the microwaves come out this way. And this can be a microwave relay station, and in particular you see them on the mountaintops, and you know this is shining from one up to the other, and it's communicating with that, and the on off is your information. And so in this case, this one is set at about 10 gigahertz, where this was 2.45 gigahertz. Water loves to absorb that frequency, so all your microwaves are tuned to that one. So you put anything with water and sugars, they tend to get that. In fact, the whole original design of the microwave was because of a worker, I believe it's AT&T, had a candy bar, Mr. Goodbar, in his pocket. And as he was working on the microwave communication equipment and the radar, I guess it was radar equipment at the end of World War II, he noticed it was melted and realized, hey, wait a minute, you know, these microwaves when they're on high power can be absorbed by sugars, and if you tune it up, you can get a microwave oven. So that was kind of the lead into the history of the microwave oven.
I know that's like a small setup and stuff like that, but like on a bigger setup, with those pieces are controlled, like be using flash rods and stuff like that?
Using what?
Flash rods?
I'm not, I don't know what that is.
It's a controlled frequency.
So you can control the frequency?
Yeah.
So you can do multiple frequencies?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean that, and so that's the idea, is that I can have multiple communications then at multiple frequencies. We call it multiplexing. And so the amount of conversations in this beam, I could probably have up to like 10,000 different conversations in this beam at different frequencies, or I can also.
You could combine everything into one beam for the most part, and then use the end to bring out whatever communication.
Right.
something like this, are we using just one frequency going across?
Yeah, this is just one frequency. It's just 10 gigahertz. And the only thing I can't do anything with it. I can't turn it on and off. But if I did add a switch right here, which at times I have, here's my little switch. I can turn this thing off, on, off, on, off, on, and then that would be my data. And that particular pattern, on, off, would represent my data, you know, as I communicate. But if I show you this, this one is creating, and again, going back to this picture, again, that's just kind of what I want to leave you with is, what is the math saying? Even though I haven't done the math for you, what the math is saying here is that if you put some changing current, that makes a magnetic field. A magnetic field, a changing magnetic field makes changing electric field, which makes a changing magnetic field, which makes a changing electric field, which makes a changing magnetic field. And it continues on down. And so what I have is that picture right here. This just happens to be at a frequency of 10 gigahertz. This was 2.5-ish gigahertz here. And you can see that because this one detects it here. And so when you send that information in here, this is my detector, and it detects that energy. But watch this for a moment. Just like I was trying to show you with the radio to convince you that these are electro and magnetic fields, and to convince you that there's a direction to them, I have it set up so that this one has an electric field going this way. No, same as that one, sorry. It has an electric field this way and a magnetic field this way. And so when it comes into this detector is designed to detect that electric field. So what do you think might happen if I took this detector and I turned it this way? What am I picking up now? Seems to be picking up nothing. Why? Because this is made out of an electric field in this direction. This is designed to pick up an electric field now in this direction. And so there is nothing in that direction. So when I turn it back, I will get my energy from my electromagnetic waves. And sometimes the waves will go through, sometimes they won't. If I put this here, kind of goes through, kind of gets blocked. If I put this here, it really gets blocked. Maybe put it better, it really gets reflected. Ever look closely at this? Why that metal grid in there? What's that metal grid for? Yeah, to reflect those microwaves back inside, to keep them trapped inside. So I've got a whole metal compartment around the edge to keep those microwaves inside, but it doesn't have to be a solid metal piece. Here's a grid, keep them inside, yet the nice part about the grid is I can now also see inside. And so I can see the food cooking and yet still keep the microwaves trapped inside.
So if you had a higher frequency, you would go through that a bit better, right?
Yes, I'll just say yes because we're going to get to that in a second. Yes, I want to show you some different effects of the higher frequency. Yeah.
Is it the amplitude of the waves that's causing the interference?
I should probably answer that more. It's the frequency, not so much the amplitude. I know in your mind you think, because you know we draw amplitude like it's distance, but there is no distance up and down. We just draw it that way. But that's just the strength of the field. It's not really up. Yeah. So be a little careful with that. Well, anyways, as we're getting close to the end here, now I think I can give you this answer over here that I was trying to say earlier. So these are our electromagnetic waves. Notice they come in a whole range of frequencies here. I didn't go through the math, but if you do look at the math, I at least want to give you the results. Remember I said that if you put these two equations together, that the strength of the electric and magnetic field should be some kind of number. It turns out that that number happens to be the velocity of these waves. I'll just use V for velocity, which is why I put this one down here. So what is that velocity? And if you look carefully, you see magnetic fields, electric fields, magnetic fields, electric fields, and then you see the permeability and permittivity of free space. So Maxwell did exactly that. He went through the math. He discovered that there were electromagnetic waves. He and Hertz ran a couple of experiments, I guess it was mostly Hertz, ran these experiments, proved that there were such thing as electromagnetic waves, then said they would be traveling at this speed. And he comes up with this number, 1 over the square root of the product of the permittivity and permeability of free space. All right, well, let's get our calculator out and calculate this. That's what he did, and I forgot my calculator. May I beg, borrow, steal yours? All right, so I'm going to turn on my calculator. And this is probably the best discovery of all. He puts in these numbers. So what was mu naught? 4 pi times 10 to the negative 7, right? What's epsilon naught? 8.85 times 10 to the minus 12. Multiply them together. Take the square root. Take the reciprocal of that. And I get a number that was very familiar to him. Maybe it's familiar to you. Speed of light. What does that tell him? What does it tell you? And why did he probably get up on his desk and jump around? What did he just show? Light is an electromagnetic wave. And so even though I have been showing you areas here that are not detectable by the human eye, I want to leave you with this idea. There's not much difference here. This detects electromagnetic waves. This detects electromagnetic waves. Light is a subset of this category of electromagnetic waves. So this is section 3. I'm going to jump all the way over to section 7 in the book here and show you this diagram. Here's what I want to finish the semester on is all these electromagnetic waves, starting with a low frequencies, what I was doing in the megahertz, getting to higher frequency, 2.5 gigahertz, getting to higher frequencies at 10 gigahertz, and then finally getting to even higher frequencies, hundreds of terahertz. Grab a pair of cool glasses. Oh, I should have passed these out a lot sooner. It's going to take a while for. Grab one quickly and sit here. I'll go. Oh, send that pack back the other direction. There we go. All right. But the same thing can be done on a small scale. When I say small scale, what I mean is on an atomic level. And I'll just plug it in for now and wait for a second so everybody gets their cool glasses. But these cool glasses will separate the electromagnetic waves into low frequencies to high frequencies. And so let's look carefully at this chart, because this really is the important conceptual grand finale. Math or no math, this is what I want to make sure we finish the semester on. Yeah.
How do you know to take the inverse root of that?
Well, again, I didn't prove it to you, but if you were to take the electric field here and put it into here, and if you want to follow along in section 3, he does do this. It's not a simple set of math, but it's not unreasonable for you to do. That's why he works it out.
Just reduce that.
And he reduces it down and comes up with the wave equation, and this is it. And so, like I said, he was quite pleasantly surprised to realize, number one, there is possible to make electromagnetic waves. Number two, they travel at this enormously high speed, which happens to be the same of light. So his conclusion is light must be one form of electromagnetic wave. And that's what I want to convince you it is. And so now we have a much broader understanding of optics. Optics is a subcategory of electromagnetics. And that's what light is. And so again, whether this be a detector here, or a detector here, or a detector here, or a detector here. I don't have my cell phone on me. I was going to pull out my cell phone. But a detector there, they all work the same way. They all detect electromagnetic waves. Now, they do it at different frequencies. So it takes different technologies to detect different frequencies. So I'm not trying at all to say your eyes are built the same way as this radio. But I am trying to say the basic physics is the same, that these are electromagnetic waves. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. They're just the little antennas. Yeah, I think they might be gun diodes. Not sure which one they use.
You know why the waveguides like always have that same type of rectangular motion, or like just waveguides?
Well, because they spread more in one direction of the small direction than the wider direction. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
You know why that would be though?
Yeah, that's again, we can answer that with our electromagnetics. In fact, we will next semester. That's our optics, our diffraction through a slit. And so the smaller the slit, the more it spreads out. Which I was going to wait for a moment, but maybe now's a good time to bring it up. For those of you who are going to be in Physics 123 next semester, which is, I guess, half of you, because, oh, that's right, half of you are going to be done. That's always sad. Was our last lecture together, and that's always sad. Although I always tell myself it would be sadder if you had to take it again. So maybe it's not so bad that you are done here and don't have to take it again here. But what I do want to say here then is look at what we will call the whole electromagnetic spectrum. That what I was showing you first was down here at the lower frequencies, the one that's easiest to make, the ones that were made first, the ones that I did for you real quick. The reason I hooked up that radio was it wasn't real hard to get these frequencies. But as we get to higher frequencies, they become technologically more complicated, so I got to buy things like a microwave, or I got to buy things like a microwave transmitter. But as we go up, we would get to higher and higher frequencies, and look at this very, very narrow part of the electromagnetic spectrum. This is the part that your eyes see. What is the difference then between red light, blue light, orange light, green light? What is it? It's the frequency. And so they're all electromagnetic waves. And the only thing your eyes are telling you is your eyes are saying, hey, this is a different frequency. And it gets registered in your brain as a different color. It's really no different than, how do I get a different frequency on here? Turn the dial, right? And I detect a different channel. I go to this station. I don't usually say, oh, that's red. That's green. Oh, that's blue. But it is the same thing, and that's what I really want to make sure you get out of this. All the electromagnetic waves, the whole spectrum is the same idea. It is an electric field makes a magnetic field, the magnetic field makes an electric, and so forth and so on. It's just your brain can detect a certain range, and notice it's a small range, and notice the different colors. That's why I had you grab the cool glasses. If you want to put on the cool glasses and look at the light bulb, what do you see? You hopefully will see the whole spectrum of colors. You will see this, and I have no control over it. All I do is heat a filament, and the little electrons in there vibrate at all kinds of different rates, and so some are at hundreds of terahertz, which gives me kind of a violet. Some are a little lower than that, which give me kind of a red. Some are in between, which kind of give me a green or a yellow. If I put, here's a fun one to look at. Here's helium. If I put the helium one in here and look at that with the cool glasses, That, I think, is a little more enlightening in terms of the science, because as I look at that one, I should have shut this off. As I look at that one, I will see not every different frequencies. Here the atoms can only vibrate at a particular set of frequencies. There's about 9 or 10 of them. I see some yellows and some greens and some reds and some violets in there. If I try a different light bulb, what's this one? Yeah, I won't show you argon. What's this one? No, got something a little brighter. That's krypton. Well, this isn't very bright, but this one is very simple. Here is hydrogen. Hydrogen is a much simpler atom than helium. It's only got 1 electron, and as a consequence of that, it does a lot less vibrations. And I think there's, are there 4 you can see in the visible? A violet, kind of a turquoise, a red, and yeah, your angle's got the computer screen on there. Sorry about that. But somewhere in here, I thought I had one of my favorites. Where's neon? Ah, here's neon. And so, neon, having 10 electrons, can have a lot more vibrations. They tend to all be in the lower frequency, at least of the visible spectrum. So you will hopefully see things like red, orange, yellow, maybe a tint of a green, but none of your blues. And so there is your higher frequencies. And so let's look again at this chart. If I come back over here and look at this chart, like I said, the big point of this chapter, and the whole reason the title of the chapter is called Electromagnetic Waves, is to say, how are electromagnetic waves produced? Well, you start with some kind of current that is changing, because a changing current would make a magnetic field. A magnetic field would make an electric field. An electric field would make a magnetic, which would make an electric, would make a magnetic. And so hundreds of miles, or in the case of our sun, 93 million miles away, there is an electric field detected by my eyes that originated from some current that was created on the surface of the sun. And so I see that visible light. I see the reds and the greens and the blues, all that have traveled 93 million miles away. But let's go up this spectrum. You saw me do the ones that I can control, which is more like in the AMs and the radio communications, the microwaves. I didn't do anything in the infrared, but hopefully you see the whole idea that these are really essentially all the same thing. In fact, I really wish we would get rid of the phrase speed of light. I mean, what's wrong with that? Now, light is a small part of the electromagnetic waves. It really should be, what's the speed of electromagnetic waves? But the truth is, we discovered light first, obviously. Our self-detectors detected light first, and so we measured light, and so we seem to come back to and still call it light, but the whole point, it is an electromagnetic wave. So all of our telecommunication stuffs travel at the speed of light. Our infrared travels at the speed of light. Obviously, visible light travels at the speed of light. Are there even higher frequencies? Yes, X-rays, higher. Well, I guess ultraviolet, then X-rays, then gamma rays. And so there's a whole set of all these electromagnetic waves. And that's really the main thing I wanted you to see. It's why, as I was beginning to say, you guys who will be around in January, guess what the next chapter is? What is chapter 35? We'll do it next semester. Those of you who already did it, what is it? Optics. Right? We have just introduced you to electromagnetic waves. A subset of that is visible light. And so 4 chapters after this is optics. And so next spring we will do 4 chapters on optics. We will focus our attention directly on this part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and then we will have a test on our optics, and we will learn a lot about that. Obviously, don't worry about that now. You've got a lot of other things to worry about before then. So, as again, we come to the very end. And even though I didn't derive these equations, I would like to finish with 2 things if I have enough time. One for sure. And let me summarize the whole class. I know this had been a lot of material, but really, this can be summarized, as I like to say many times, physics is what? Knowing how to apply what? Few. A few. Here's what we did first. The first thing we did, we called it Gauss's law. We said the integral on a closed surface of E dot dA equals what? All right. It equals the charge inside of that surface over epsilon naught. Right? That's the very first thing we learned. That was how to create an electric field. You create an electric field by charges. Okay? Next thing we learned was what? How to create a magnetic field. We call this Ampere's law. Now, don't get me wrong, we did a lot of stuff between here and here. I think there were 4 chapters on circuits and capacitors and resistors. So I don't want to belittle any of that, but I do want to say the fundamental physics was this: electric fields. Fields apply a force. Force and motion. That makes currents. And then we learned how to make magnetic fields. So how do we make magnetic fields? Well, the Ampere's law part of it, before we saw today, was this part, right? The first way of making a magnetic field was saying there are charges that flow. And so that's where we spent most of the chapter on. Now, recently, I think it was 2 chapters ago, we got to Faraday's law. What did Faraday's law say? Yeah, Faraday's law said there is a second way of making an electric field. Not only can you make an electric field from charges, but you can make an electric field from a changing magnetic field. And that was Faraday's law. And so we did a lot of things on Faraday's law, including generators. How do you generate electricity, right? And including inductance. And how do we use inductors and capacitors to make resonating and resonating circuits. And then finally, today, what did we learn? Yeah, we learned that there is a second way of creating a magnetic field, as we would expect, and it is a changing electric field. So what those 3 equations are telling me is 2 ways to create an electric field, 2 ways to create a magnetic field. Now, that's not the only thing we had. We saw also kind of a similar equation for the magnetic field. We didn't really use it much, but I'm going to put it up here for completeness because it usually is listed as the 4th of Maxwell's whole system of equations. What was the flux of the magnetic field on any closed surface? 0. We said there was no such thing as monopole, so this is Gauss's law of magnetism. So Gauss's law of magnetism, Gauss's law of electricity, Ampere-Maxwell's equation, and Faraday's equation. That's what we learned this semester. Those 4 equations. Nothing more, but nothing less, because there's a lot we can do with those 4 equations. And so I wanted to make sure as we came to the end that you saw those listed up together. Often you'll hear them just referred to as Maxwell's equations. I think that's a little unfair to Faraday and Ampere and all the other ones, but he's the one who really put them all together, and he's the one, as you saw here today, created probably the most significant, well, I shouldn't put priorities there, but this whole electromagnetic waves and the whole electromagnetic communications here is really because of this added term. So now that you guys are familiar with this and your math is getting much more sophisticated, let me show you 2 things that are just beyond this book, that you are ready and posed, and you'll be ready next year when you transfer to wherever and you walk into class and your professor comes into your electricity class and puts Gauss's on the board. It might look a little different because you have more math. And I want you to be ready for that, to say, oh, that's the same thing, it's just at a higher math level, because it may not look it. Let me take that equation and change it a little bit. We have an integral of E dot dA is equal to the charge inside over epsilon naught. It's called Gauss's law. But Gauss did a lot in math. Some of you probably know this quite well in math. Is it 200? Where you do Gauss's divergence theorem? So what could you do with a flux integral over a surface? You can change it to an integral over volume, right? If you want to call it a triple integral, so be it. I'll just say integral over volume. But what goes here? I heard it, the divergence of the electric field. So the divergence of the electric field. Now there are different ways of writing it, but this is probably the most common. Is this how you guys write the divergence? Okay. So those of you who are there, great. Those of you who aren't there, get ready. But we can change what we would call Gauss's law in integral form to Gauss's law in differential form. And it becomes a derivative problem. And then if we take Math 220, we can learn to solve derivatives. We could do so much more. The problems we did will look childish to the problems you are now getting ready to do. But there's the first step. What can I do to this side of the equation? Isn't the charge enclosed nothing more than the charge density added up over volume? Do you see I have an integral over volume and an integral over volume? What can I do next? Take the derivative with respect to volume and get rid of the integrals? And so the divergence of the electric field is equal to the charge density over epsilon naught. Does that look the same to you? And it may not. That's why I feel like, okay, it'll be my job to point this out, because next year when your teacher comes in and writes Gauss's law on the board on the first day, okay, remember guys, you learned, and he writes this on the board. I don't want you to be too shell-shocked to go, that's just not how we learned it back at City College. At City College, we learned it this way. And so what I am saying is take what we learned, which is at a Math 160 level, take your math now, which you're learning, because your next E&M class will expect you to know Math 200 and 220, and put it together, and that's what Gauss's law will look like. In fact, let's try it with all 4 of them. What would this one become? Well, if I may save a little time, isn't that kind of the same thing? I mean, didn't we take a flux and just apply Gauss's divergence theorem? Okay, so again, don't be surprised if when you know, for those of you who do take upper division E&M, which I suppose that everybody related to computer engineering or electrical engineering, but maybe not mechanical or structural engineering. I'm not sure about that. Anybody know? Okay. All right. But there would be the differential form of this. And I heard some of you others mention it. We could do the same thing here. But since this is a path integral, we would have to use Stokes' theorem. So let's apply it to that one for those of you who are familiar with Stokes' theorem, or those of you who are getting familiar with Stokes' theorem. E dot ds, I'll start there. This is minus the derivative, and I'll write it as an integral over area, because what can you do with a path integral? Can't you change it to an area integral? Right? And so to page a path into the area surrounded by that path, what does this become? Oh good, the curl of E. So I was concerned maybe some of you hadn't seen it before. Maybe some of you haven't, but obviously a number of you have, and you know what Stokes' theorem is. And, all right, and so this equals to minus the derivative of B integral of dA. But again, notice they're both integrals of dA. So what could I do in this next step? Get rid of the integral, and that's why it is called the differential form. And I personally like it a little better in the differential form. Can you see how it is saying an electric field is created perpendicular to a changing magnetic field? And that's the way I've been saying it in words. I've been saying it more from its differential form instead of its flux form, instead of its overall integral form. But again, hopefully you can see how that is the same as that. So again, don't be surprised if you start your E&M class and they go, hey, let's look at Faraday's law. And you learned Faraday's law like this, but you will now be learning it or using it like this. All right? And we could do one more thing here. We could apply Stokes' theorem to this last one here. And so if we go integral of B dot ds is equal to mu naught times the current inside. And in the interest of time, I'll make a quick step there. What would the current be inside? Well, it'd be current density added up over the area inside. The other term would be mu naught epsilon naught times the integral of E dot dA. But if we apply Stokes' theorem here, we can now change that into an integral over an area. We can then get current density and electric field integrated over an area. Since they're both over area, we can get rid of the integral. That's why it's called the differential form. And so the differential form, and no, this is not going to be on any test this semester. It'll be next year that you guys will see all this. But this would be Maxwell Ampere's equation when looked at in its differential form. Yeah.
Write that again over here. Sorry.
Curl.
Just the last part.
Oh, mu naught J, that one?
Yeah.
Comes from the curl of B. Curl of B equals mu naught epsilon naught times the derivative of the electric field. And so again, notice how I've been saying it today. A magnetic field is created from a changing electric field. And so I've been saying it in its differential form, even though I haven't been using its differential form. All right, one more thing. Again, won't be on the tests, but it's probably worth seeing sometime. What if and I'll just take you back to the very beginning of this semester, and take two metal wires. Here's one metal wire. Here's another metal wire. And I'll start with no current, no charge, Well, if there's no current, there's no magnetic field, right? And if there's no charge, there's no electric. No net charge. So if you just took two metal wires, isn't there charges inside? So let's rethink about what we've been doing. I would say that this metal wire actually has a bunch of positives and negatives. Positives and negatives, positives and negatives, positives and negatives. And let's look at the forces on this bar from that one. You just told me there weren't any forces. Maybe more exact is they are balanced forces, aren't they? I mean, look at this. What would happen between the plus and the plus? That would repel. So I'm going to write that as a plus to plus. What about the plus and this negative? And I'll write it as plus negative. And if these forces, I mean, if these charges are about evenly distributed, wouldn't those two be the same and they would cancel? So it's not that there aren't any forces, it's that they're balanced. And I'm not done yet, because what happens between the negative and this negative? What would happen there? And I'll write it as two negatives, they repel. And then finally, the fourth one, what about the negative and the positive here? They would attract. So when I started this off and said there was no current and no charges, what I really meant is no net charge. And I didn't mean there weren't any forces. What I meant is there's no net force, right? And so if I have just two metal bars right next to each other, I've got huge forces, but they balance each other, right? Now, of course, if I put more positives over here or more negatives over here, there would be some kind of electrical interaction. But I want you to see something that might be hard for a few of you because you haven't done 123 yet. What if I turn on the current? Maybe I'll change colors here. Maybe I'll let the current go this way. Now, if the current goes that way, what does that mean? Electrons are actually moving. So in green, I will put electrons moving. Now, bear with me for those of you who haven't heard this statement. Length contraction. One thing we're going to learn in modern physics here, that unfortunately science did not discover till the 20th century. And I say unfortunately because watch what's about to happen here. But with length contraction, what that means is when things move, they get closer together. So when these electrons start moving, aren't they closer together? And aren't these closer together? So what would you say about the force between the two sets of negatives here? Wouldn't that increase a little bit? Because we essentially have a higher concentration of negatives? Ooh. Now bear with me, especially those of you who haven't seen this. What about the positive and the positives? Well, okay, they're unchanged. What about, oh, wait a minute. I think I said that wrong. I'm sorry. The positive and the positive are unchanged. But aren't the negatives and negatives unchanged? Aren't they moving together? So the negatives don't see the negatives as moving. So I apologize for that. But it's over here where we see something different. The positives over here see these negatives as moving and therefore closer together. And there's an increase in force. The negatives over here, because they're moving, don't see the negatives moving because they're moving with them. But they would see the positives as moving that way, so there would be an increase in force. And so just because of length contraction, the concentration of the charge changes, the electric field changes, and these two wires get pulled together. If you did not know anything about length contraction, as most of you probably are, you would call this a new force. What should we call it? Magnetism. Did you catch what I'm really saying? What I'm really saying is magnetism was invented in the 19th century because we as scientists had no idea about relativity. So is there really anything about magnetism? No. Sorry. I just wasted 8 weeks of your life, huh? There is no such thing as magnetism. Magnetism is a human's way of describing a new force that is created because of motion. The motion leads into length contraction, which is an added electrical force. So we really only have electric forces. It's why today you'll hear most scientists do not call it magnetic forces. What do we usually call it? Electromagnetic forces. You still hang on to it because trust me, the math that you learned these last 8 weeks are still very useful. Don't throw it away. It's not a waste of your time. You would much rather do the increase of electrical fields via magnetism than learn non-planar differential trigonometry and geometry before you apply relativity. So this is why humans called it magnetism, because they understood it a lot sooner. It's why we still teach it, because you can understand magnetism a lot sooner than you can understand relativity. But that may change depending on how far your education takes you. If you stay in the engineering field, you probably will just always talk about the magnetic field. But if you end up in the science field, you need to realize right away that there is no magnetic fields. Magnetic fields is us humans poorly understanding the geometry of the universe, and we invented magnetism. Well, I went too long. All right. Well, hope it was a good semester. It was good for me, anyways. Well, thank you. Yeah. Don't forget tests. Obviously, study hard. Final exam, what time final? 8 a.m. Tuesday, don't forget. All right, guys.